let's talk about deficits. Apparently, in Canada, they're doing the same BS that the Republicans and so-called Democrats like Biden like to do. Deficit this, deficit that. Cut social services for the vast majority, while making rules, regulations, laws, statutes, and so on and so forth that benefit the wealthiest of the country, which who make up a small minority of the country. While the media blasts their BS insanity. Meanwhile, you talk with your neighbors and you hear them talking sense about how they can't save up for a rainy day. How they have to be concerned about the ability to to pay their mortgage or their rent, or buy food, or they have to find ways to cut their spending. How that and all many other factors, and you hear this when you talk with your neighbors, with your friends, your family, and the core of it is this: deficit is bullshit. Why? Because it is the elected officials, those appointed by elected officials, those hired by the agencies, whether they're state, local, state, or federal. Why people like Jordan Peterson and other non-intellectuals, completely disingenuous, lying dumbasses, who would be who could be considered intellectual retards, get into positions to tell you and wag your finger and tell you about stuff that you yourself talk about, that you yourself realize, because it hits you personally, because it affects you personally, because it affects your friends and your loved ones. It is because of all that. It's BS, because the policymakers and those who are hired into fields of so-called education and get titles like professors and so on and so forth, and congressmen or selectmen or councilmen or judges or DAs or police chiefs or sheriffs or your city managers or your mayors, your governors, all of them, including the media, they're all part of it. And those hired that don't have the responsibility to make the decisions, who work for the government or work in conjunction, they're not the ones making the policies. They're not the ones upwardly transferring. This upward transference, this way of regulating, so that regulating and doing laws and statutes that benefit the few and bring about this idea of austerity to cut social programs, that's something that was artificially made. That was something that's artificially made by those at the top. This is why they have. This is why when voter suppression is talked about is real, because they are maneuvering to make it so that only those who will allow them to stay in power and give them the illusion of being elected fairly happens. And if you but look into it, and if you but see what and realize that when you're talking with your friends and your neighbors, when you're talking with a total stranger that you meet at the grocery store or somewhere else, and you're talking about it, those are the issues. And I'm not talking about racially motivated policies. I'm not talking about any of that, or religious, or I'm talking about the effects that we feel when our taxes are raised, and yet we don't get the services that our taxes should be giving us. When your streets are neglected, when you are paid into it, and you've worked most of your life, and yet you hear oh, you make too much, except you're not any financial wizard, but you also know that there's no way, because your utility costs have gone up, your taxes have gone up, your these fees and this and that and so on and so forth. I mean, think about it. There are places all over the country where, also in Canada, where you need to get a fucking permit to go protest. That's unlawful. That's unlawful. Why do you need permit to speak if there's freedom of speech? This is why I call freedom of speech bullshit. It's only free to speak their nonsense, their BS, their bullshit, when those who prop up the power and those who are on top of the top ladders and the media. It's only free for them. And we've all seen it. We've all seen it. When we talk about stuff that actually matters, we get blasted and canceled, and we get shoved out. That's freedom of speech in the Western world. When you talk sanity, when you talk about the actual impacts that we see in our own personal lives, whether you live in the suburbs of Canton, Massachusetts, whether you live in the big, let's say, even in the wealthier sections of the country that have a little bit more economic and financial security. When we talk about that, when we talk sanity, about, like, for instance, how the cost of our basic needs like food is just insane. It keeps going up. Now, those areas, they talk about it, but they don't actually internalize it and come to understand how that bleeds them of their financial and economic security. This creates the Karens. It's because when you have done decades upon decades upon decades of transference to those at the top, and those who play ball with those on the top, and they go into fields of politics and start up these think tanks and go into the higher education to spread this BS when you're in the media and the only narrative is to spin it or misrepresent it or put disinformation or not talk about things that actually affect. Then what you get is that deficit. What you get is the cutting of social services that we all need, that we all want, because we need it in case of a rainy day. But when those options are being constantly cut, and yet the remnants are still in the political dialogue, in the social dialogue, that the illusion that they actually haven't been impacted, when they clearly have. When you're retired and you're collecting Social Security, and you're supposed to get Medicare and Medicaid, and when it becomes tougher to get your pills, when you have to think about cutting your pills in half, and when you have to do all sorts of other things, that is the deficit. That is upward transfer. That is restricting your liberty, your freedom, your ideals. That is taking away your responsibility and power. That is divesting from the idea that we, the people, are the power. We, the people, are the government. We, the people, are the ones that they are supposed to be responsible to us. That is how the insanity works. That is how you get what you get. And the only way to change that is to pay attention, to actually look into it. And with the technology we have, with the ability to get on the browser, on your browser, your Google, your AOL, your whatever, your Brave. There are other. For instance, I use Brave with DuckDuckGo. I get results, even though Google is doing things, because the phone I have, through the carrier I have, they work in kind of lockstep, because Google comes preset. You can't get rid of it. Facebook. I have Facebook. I can't get rid of Facebook. That's what I mean by collusion. Your carriers are allowing these malware to stay on. This malware that Google and Facebook and all these have managed to make themselves into fundamental mainstream, so that they can have the dictatorial rights to dictate how we get on, what information we get. When you do a search on Google and the thing that you're looking for doesn't pop up right at the top, and that is absolutely possible, when they can take it down because government ordered it, or they agree with the government because they're the ones getting all the transfer. It's not just Google. It's Campbell's. It's Monsanto. It's Dow. It's General Mills. It's Smithfield, and all. It's every friggin' corporation, and those on the upper tiers of the financial and economic ladder, it's your Jamie Dimon at with in that huge bank, one of those mega financial situations that got bailed out after 2008 crash. The ones that are getting the transfer right now. And the fundamental thing is it boils down to is socialize for the mega rich and those rich but lesser than the mega rich, while bleeding the economic and financial stability and security for everybody else under. That's how it works. That's how you get austerity. That's how you get this idea of deficits. And we have to come to understand this. And if we don't understand this, and we listen to these others who are supposed to be the experts, even on YouTube, and they're talking about it, it's because they bought into it, because they've been overly educated, especially those who are supposed to know about economy. They've been overly educated. But there's a difference. For instance, like God, I can't think of his name, but he's a University of Massachusetts professor. He's a Marxist economist. And then there's the Brown. There's a guy from Brown. I can't think of their names, but he's got a channel on YouTube, and he's often seen, on other larger channels on YouTube, but also been on Fox, also been on MSNBC, and all those other. Richard Wolff. He isn't overly he's not that overly educated, and when I call overly educated is that BS over education. Jordan Peterson is that BS over education, which means basically basically he didn't get an education. Peterson didn't get an education. What he got was BS. He was given that professorship, that status, because he was doing the proper narrative. There are many of them, and all of them, all the Jordan Petersons, always are the ones that are brought onto media, that are brought to talk about BS as the experts, whether you on college campuses or at some forum or whatnot. It's the same BS that Trump talks about, how he went to some elite school, and it's that same sort of BS. And the media is schizophrenic, and at one time they're telling you, no, he lied about that. No, and then other times they're like, they back up that narrative. Biden, same thing. Biden went to an elite school, but he got that BS legality, an accreditation, because the media never challenged him. And then even when they did challenge it, what they did was they spun it, or they didn't talk about it. It's what the media doesn't talk about is the stuff that impacts us, the stuff that does not inform us. That's why they are fake. That's why they are a threat and enemies. Because they're made to lie, cheat, steal, and cause division. When they, when they bring on the so-called expert or this so-called person from the from the government who are supposed to be in law enforcement or some other expertise, and they tell you and they talk about Black Lives Matter, and they more than insinuate that they've been put under as a terrorist organization, which Greenpeace and so many other places. That is the sort of stuff they do. They spin it. But it's a spin, you call it what you want, it's a lie. They are lying when they're not telling you about the pollution that these corporations that are getting the output transfer. They're lying about the decades of PG&E getting tax subsidies while they're not maintaining the very infrastructure which has caused fires for decades in California. They're not. They're lying when the so-called forest fires, which are purposely done in Brazil, they're lying when they're talking about a duly elected person in Bolivia, and you have this criminal that they've put in. They're when they keep talking about the BS in Venezuela, and they're not talking about the sanctions, which are crippling not the government, but the people. They're lying. When they talk about Hong Kong, this includes Democracy Now!, and they don't tell you about the connections between Western and U.S. So-called think tanks or people that are supposed to be diplomats, U.S. or Western diplomats, and how they're working together. When you see videos that come out where you see these people waving flags, American flags or British flags, and they're talking in English, it should be plainly obvious. It should be plainly obvious that it's propaganda. When they spin that recent law, they never mentioned that the Hong Kong government, with the agreement with the when Hong Kong was transferred back, they never mentioned that Hong Kong was supposed to put in laws that every country in the world does about sedition and treason and trying to subvert and subversion and all that, which the U.S. has, that the U.K. has, that Germany has, that India has, and every other friggin' government on the world, and Hong Kong never did that. They don't mention that to you. That is why it's propaganda. That is why it's BS. When they were covering Hong Kong before it was handed over, they never mentioned how when the British were ruling, that they sent out suppression squads that killed more Chinese in Hong Kong. No, they never. They rarely, if ever, mentioned that, or they rarely just blatantly came out and said the truth and said, no, the British were brutal, repressive government, and they are giving supremacy to their white business interests. When they talked about the opium wars back then, and if you think that they didn't have propaganda now, think about it. They had town criers, and they had other official government authorized runners or those to spread rumors that were paid by those by those who were in the ruling class and those in the aristocracy, which includes the bankers and your big businesses. They never talk about any of that, or how the bankers and those in the got access. Things have not changed with the nobility and the so-called monarchs. It's the same process that's happening today, just a different name, different faces. It's all cosmetic. And if you cannot understand this, then you're part of the problem, because you're not being a patriot, because you are not investing in your country. You're disinvesting, because you look at it as land and resources rather than your friends, your family, your children, and the greater community. Whether you live in Canton or whether you live in Coatesville like I do, when you see buildings and roads and all that other stuff, and you think of that as the country, rather than the country being the collection of all the people who live in the country, who use the infrastructure. It is the people. Nothing gets built without the people. Nothing. Nothing gets made. Nothing gets created. Nothing. All these people that are the so-called, such as what the hell's his name? Rockefeller. He didn't create the steam engine. Ford. He didn't create the assembly line. It was somebody else who came up with the idea. All he did was he found somebody who had the idea, he paid, and that person accepted, rather than saying no, this idea is mine, and I'm going to see about it, and I'm going to get others to work with me to do it. He sold out. That's how it works. So when you have the money and you have control of the government, and you can repress and suppress and take ideas that were never yours. The military, same thing with the military. Everything that's created was never done by those who control the production. Every person, whether it's Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook or those from Google, those are all things that were created by others, thought up by others, and they bought the rights. And that's how it works. And in a nutshell, when you have the government and the wealthy and the corporations working together, that's called fascism. That's what fascism is. And all the things that keep fascism in place, that's basically a transference of wealth, whether it's your intellectual, your physical, your emotional, the infrastructure, the land, all of it, all the resources. It's when the production and control goes to those who already have the financial and economic levers, and really don't have want for more, but don't necessarily need to have the want for more. When they already have it and they get more of it, they get more control. And the only way to do that is our acceptance of it. And when we accept it, when we buy into it, that's the propaganda. That's the lie. That's the crime. And if you know anything about every country in history, those that don't no longer exist or exist, and the thing is, country and nations were never really, and all the flags were never really a thing until until somebody clever enough told it to those who had the control, thereby the influence. But regardless, the simple fact of the matter is, they've used that exactly to get control. And one of the greatest crimes and sins is the idea of money, of barter. Because when you have the resources and you have the influence, and you can get others to do the work of bullying or pressuring or eliminating those of small mind who can't see that they are being traitors to themselves, to their families, to their community, who just want the immediacy of their security, of their importance, of their influence. And they don't consider how that can be used against them. That's treachery. That's being a traitor. And that's the same sort of thing that those at the top, and those that go into politics, and those that go into media, and those that go into law enforcement commonly share. You lie, you cheat, you steal, you kill, you murder, you do everything. I mean, there's a video of Mike Pompeo, who, when he was the director of the CIA, talking about this, saying exactly that. That's how it works. That is the scam. That is something that, if we but understand, and then put together that we are collectively the country, and that this race relations is a lie, that the economy is a lie, that ownership is a lie, because the only reason you would buy it is because you want to preserve the fantasy, the idea, and you want to preserve that privilege and exception. And you don't take into consideration how it can be used against you, because it has been. It always has been. Truth is what matters, not free speech. Free speech is a lie. Truth is life. Free speech is existence. You exist in the social structures which keep you down and push you down, who divest you from avenues of gaining control for yourself, and thereby the collective, so that we move forward. So that when we say we love ourselves, we love our children, we love our family, we love our friends, we love our country, that actually they actually mean something, because we're moving forward, we're progressing forward. This whole idea that you can't have that and have the military security, so that others who sitting at the top can use their own to bully. That's another lie. It's another lie that we grew up thinking has to be real, but it isn't. The other lie is that, war and only war and fighting can advance it. That's another lie. That's another lie. But that requires understanding. That requires curiosity. That requires an investment in the collective, in the collective community that make up the country. That requires an investment in throwing away the BS, stupid crap, and being parrots and mockingbirds. That requires understanding and interest and curiosity and all that, and investment, and understanding that the insular personal family dynamic, or my dynamic, requires a greater community and investment in that greater community, which includes the natural world. And understanding that the natural world is what provides us with the resources. And how we use those resources dictates how the natural world will be stable, so that it can continue to provide us. That is not something this system, or any system in all of history, has been able to do. We are not systems. We are not systems. We are not supposed to be systems. We say we're not systems, that we have potential, that we have all this. But when we live by the rules and dictates of the system from the top down, you are going to be the system. And the system can be used to repress, suppress, to kill, to murder, to pillage, and plunder. That's how it works. This is why we need to have leaders and representatives. No, not leaders. We need to have representatives who can see, who can come up with potential solutions. At the same time, teach others. Because when those potential solutions are applied and they work, then you have something material and real that you can say it works. But that's the other thing, is that this whole thing with capitalism and so on and so forth. There's this idea for a smaller number that it works, and that's the propaganda. And that's the propaganda. That's a disinvestment from our core beliefs of morality, ethics, principles, which is all based on natural law, where it becomes meaningless, and there's a gray area that there should never have been a gray area. this idea that all the violence should be in the hands of those at the top, while everybody else has to use free speech and protest, while the violence is being done there and then. That's another reason why I constantly talk about there is no such thing as non-violence. Force doesn't always mean physical. Force could be like that black militia, who were heavily armed and armored, who marched in Georgia, and there was not a shot fired. Why? Because they were displaying force. They were showing their intention that they were willing to use that force. That's not violence, but that's show of force. That is how we need to do it. The militias, all the militias in this country's history, as well as in Canada, and the police, that is what they've done, but they've been willing to use it. They've been more than willing to use it. The KKK, more than willing to use it. And the reason why the left never gets anywhere is because we don't show the force and say, hey, we're more than willing to use it. Back down and really think about it and actually talk to us and see it from our natural laws, or we will have a fight. That's how it works. That's how it always has worked. No, I'm sorry, not always. That's how it should have always worked. In the animal kingdom, that dynamic plays out. I'll give you a good example. There's lion prides, then there's hyenas. But when you watch nature programs, you hear about there's this friction and so on and so forth, and they make sides. This isn't supposed to be a program about nature. But when it boils down to it, is that hyenas will try to use force. Lions try to use force again. And it's this interaction between them, with a few times where there's actual physical action done, and most of the time it doesn't result in actual death. There may be injuries, and as I said, most, not all. But the same dynamic works. That's because both sides are showing force. And the wolves do the same thing. Wolf pack will show force to a grizzly. In the herbivores, like big herds of deer and so on and so forth, they'll show force as a collective against a small pack of wolves. And that dissuades the pack of wolves from trying to kill one of them, so they can eat. It's a dynamic that happens. It's something that happens in the natural world, and we are part of the natural world. Show of force and a willing to use the force is completely different. It's a statement of reality. And for us not to do that, that's why we lose. That's why we constantly find ourselves in the short hairs, because we aren't willing to demonstrate that force. And why the right often co-opted, who are often propagandized, who are often bought into their own disadvantage from those on the top. That's why they always seem to get what they get. They always seem to win. Force, show of force has a way of bringing out more rational thinking, because self-preservation starts to really kick in. Because fear gives way to more cautious thinking. That's how it works.